Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. A little later, we're going to talk about Cuba, the real Cuba, from a first-hand perspective. But first, my alma mater is CU Boulder, and they've got an interesting program that bring in conservatives like Robert Kaufman. Robert, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, remind me what it's a visiting chair in Western conservative thought. Am I close to that title?
You're pretty close. I'm the visiting conservative professor in the Center for Western Thought.
How long has this program been going on?
This is 5 years. I'm the 5th conservative professor for the year.
All right, let me set it up this way. As a survivor of the indoctrination camp that is called the University of Colorado, it was remarkable for a libertarian like me to go through and just see how my way of thinking, my philosophy, was not just poo-pooed, but attacked, and there was nobody ever there in faculty who pushed it. And so for 5 years, there's been, and I consider what you guys do, a token effort to bring some balance to what's going on in the campus. I wish there was more parity in what particularly liberal arts students reach. And so I see this as the beginning of something good, but it's still really small.
That's right. I would liken it, if you wanted to use a military metaphor, to Omaha Beach in D-Day. We're on the beach, but there's still a lot of gunfire, and the fate of this enterprise is going to depend. It's a great start, but the key is to institutionalize it so that it survives any specific administration or any particular composition of the border regions.
You know, I think a lot of people watch and they'll go, man, I am so tired of you conservatives lambasting higher ed. Higher ed is good. Higher ed brings us new thought. It's a safe place for people to argue. And you guys keep saying that it's out of balance, it's out of kilter, that there isn't enough diversity of thought. That's because you guys are just so far off the ideological scale. But you're complaining about something that's not real. Is it real?
Oh, it's deep and pervasive, but there are really two universities. For all our problems, we still have the greatest university system in the world when it comes to the hard sciences, economics, most economic departments of free market. Even at CU, which is a bastion of the left in the humanities, your aerospace, engineering, hard sciences, geology, you're cutting edge and national. The real problem is in the soft sciences and the humanities, where since the late 1960s, and it's steadily become worse, the academic left not only is dominated, but they've chilled any type of intellectual diversity.
Think tanks like Heritage, Cato, even on a local level like Independence, really came out as a reaction because there was no place to document these ideas. There was no place to get out a different thought. There was no publication going on. And that's why Heritage started. That's why Cato started. That's why Independence started. Why is that? Tell me about the generation that's in control of higher ed. I mean, I know we've got regents. We elect them. They're good people. But I feel that there's a huge disconnect.
Well, I'm affiliated with Heritage. Several converging things account for where we are right now. The first is the dumbest thing that the Congress ever did, and we're still suffering from it. Namely, that during the Vietnam War, the only way you could get a perpetual deferment was to become a professor. So you don't have to be Johann von Neumann's theoretical mathematics to understand that people of the left disproportionately gravitated to the professoriate.
So in other words, I don't want to get drafted, I can do my undergrad, but wait a second, I can still string this out for a few more years if I get my doctorate in the soft sciences and put me on the track to becoming a professor.
Correct. So in the parlance of today's language, we are being run by the tenured radicals of the 1960s who spawned a second generation of them. That's one problem.
Let me push on that. Though that was still the people who pushed for a free speech movement. That was a group of people who said, enough with the establishment, we need to have more diversity. They wanted to be heard. I thought they held an ideal that there should be more debate.
Let me quote my heroes from Hawthorne, California, the Beach Boys. wouldn't it be nice? But that's not what they mean by diversity. Their definition of diversity, or the way it's morphed, is every group but conservative white males saying the same thing. I'll give you sort of the typical social science debate. America's bad. No, it's worse. No, it's terrible. See, we have diversity. So they don't mean diversity in an old-fashioned liberal sense.
People think you're joking.
I'm not joking.
But as a survivor of this, that's exactly what I got in the liberal arts school at CU.
I'm not joking.
Why is there such reluctance to bring in free marketeers, those people who believe that government should do less in our business, should get hands off? You're a much more hawkish. I'm telling you, my classes that I took, I never had one pro-military teacher talk about their side of society.
That's true, and the kids are stunned with it now. But several other things have reinforced the chilling atmosphere of the tenured radicals. One, if we're really honest, conservatives believed, and I understand why the think tanks were created. They can supplement things, but think tanks cannot substitute for universities, and if you cede the universities to the left, we are reaping what we've sown on that. So that's part of the problem. Conservatives have to develop a rationale for academic service, and then many conservatives who have a choice are reluctant to go into academics, knowing what the barriers to entry are. So if you, the insidious perfect storm of those three variables accounts for the problem we face right now in academics.
Now, some of the academics I work with are survivors of being professors, of being the one conservative professor in the law department.
Yes.
You had that similar thing. So this is, where did you teach?
I've had 30 years of this. I've taught at the University of Vermont in Burlington, where I was the only faculty member who was a conservative, one of 660. And I replaced one, and I've been the only conservative, literally, not just a figurative sense, in many of the programs I've been in for my entire academic career.
Is it that your colleagues in academia are scared to have you there because you might challenge them and win over the hearts and minds of some of the students? Or is it just that you're so annoying they don't want to deal with your type of thought?
Well, it's a combination of both, but let me distinguish, making reasonable distinctions. Old-fashioned liberals, World War II liberals, the Harry Truman, John Kennedy, Scoop Jackson liberals, no problem. They were fair.
What do you mean?
Well, they were committed to excellence and objective standards, and they were patriotic. And when I was at Columbia getting my PhD, and most of my advisory people were old-fashioned Truman liberals, I never felt in any way I was being judged ideologically, but on the merits. Because you don't want professors to indoctrinate in any, I'm not a theologian. It's an abuse, it's malpractice. My job is to teach students how to think, not what to think. The real problem began when the anti-Vietnam War left hijacked the university and spawned a second generation of political correctness that we're now living through, even more virulent than the initial anti-war radicals.
How much does somebody like Saul Lewinsky play in this? In other words, is there a larger play here? Is it just that these were Vietnam folks who didn't want to go to the war, found a good way to get out, and they found a career path? Or is this more nefarious, I guess I'm asking?
No, I don't think it's nefarious. It's really groupthink. Let me give you an example from 1980 election. Katharine Graham, the wife of the publisher of the Washington Post, couldn't believe Reagan won, and her reaction was this: how did that happen? I didn't know anybody who voted for him. So if you put these people on a polygraph, if you put Boulder on a polygraph, they truly believe that they represent
the mainstream.
Not only the mainstream, but settled opinion. And there are people but the vast preponderance of people
the
really
same,
believe
the same thing
this.
holds true with the media.
Yes.
I look at NPR and local affiliates here, Colorado Public Radio. They live in this bubble that they don't even see that there is a lack
Yes.
of diversity, that there's not one person in that news crew who can pull them out and go, wait a second, we're missing a bigger story here, or we're not answering this question. It's not in their realm. And somebody who's outside of both academia and the news, I look at this and I go, are you kidding me? There's not one person in there to say, you know, here's the person we ought to talk to, and we're asking the wrong question.
You're absolutely right. And if you look at conservative think tanks or groups that study the media, the Goldberg files, the statistics are damning. 90 or 95% of the media hold very liberal views, and that has been intensifying. And if it were the other side, just think of the double standard, the howling about conservative talk radio. The only time, if you ask the left today, their idea of a balance is 90-10. That anything that doesn't give the left vast preponderance, even programs like this at University of Colorado Boulder have attracted a lot of controversy just for the audacity in their view of having conservatives on campus.
And I don't believe it's malicious.
Nope.
I don't believe it's malicious.
I agree.
I just think it's not in the realm of thinking. That possibly there's this other thought. And this is what gets me. With the election of Donald Trump, you would think they might go, maybe we ought to rethink what we're doing here. Maybe we're not quite as mainstream as we think. Maybe we're missing something.
Well, I think there's a little of that because this program in Boulder has grown in its strength and breadth. Because if you think about it, there are many things that account for Donald Trump, but I believe that one of the key things, one of the key variables accounting for the Trump victory was a rebellion against political correctness. Even when, and I was one of them, you had reservations about the way Trump said things and wished he had said it differently. A lot of people said vicariously, finally, there's a guy who is willing to give two middle fingers to this stifling, chilling speech.
Tell me how stifling it is on college campuses.
Oh,
and give me an example if you could.
If you use terms like lynching, which is a neutral term, you can be in trouble. If you use the wrong pronoun to address the wrong person in the spectrum of sexuality, you can be in trouble. If you have the audacity to defend certain causes on campus, which many mainstream Americans support, you can be in trouble. And you have to have a relatively thick skin and a fairly combative personality. I have both to survive and thrive on a university campus.
When you say trouble,
yeah.
What is trouble?
If you are accused at a university of the isms, racism, sexism, that's a career ender.
For a professor.
That is a career ender. And sadly, in many cases, you have to be very careful because the burden of proof, the presumption is not innocent until you're proven guilty.
But isn't the greatest joke, irony on this, and it'd be funny if it wasn't so serious, is that these are the people who look at the McCarthy era and talk about McCarthyism and the witch hunt of McCarthyism with such disdain, but in fact, they have created a politically correct environment which does exactly that.
Well, first of all, hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue. So it's an example of that. I'm even going to be stronger. The McCarthy period lasted only 4 years, and even at its most virulent peak in 53, 54, there was far more diversity on university campuses than there is now.
We're running out of time, but real quickly, how many students do you teach now in in your year as the visiting fellow?
Probably 100 total, and I'd say of that, 20 would be adults who have followed me from the Conference on World Affairs, and I'm their conservative safe space.
Now, I'm not that great on math, but let me see if I got this right. On a campus that has some 30,000 students, maybe 40,000 students, I haven't kept up, there are 80 that will get a taste of a differing ideology politically.
But yeah, though to be fair, the kids in the hard sciences are largely immune from this madness. So
I don't know. If you're on that campus and you live in those dorms, you are surrounded by a culture that oozes that madness.
true, but kids have a healthy instinct. The Bible tells us to rebel against their parents. So I actually think students are more receptive than you might think, because no one likes to be indoctrinated.
But it happens so well. Robert, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Stay tuned.